Welcome to the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. I'm your host, Brian Russell, and it's a real privilege to have back my original guest, Eugene Yotka. You can go back and listen to episode 1. We're going to move the conversation even further. Gene is a good friend of mine. I've known him for over a decade now. He holds the Master of Divinity and Master of Pastoral Counseling from Asbury Seminary, and he's a certified spiritual director, and he got his certificate. He received his certification from St. Thomas University. He also spent 12 years serving local churches in the United Methodist denomination, and he's presently leads the Awakening Institute and offers courses in contemplative practices and serves as a spiritual director. Again, Gene, thank you so much for being back on the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversation show.
It's always a blessing, Brian.
Yeah, well, let's jump right back in. Again, it's been about it's been over 8 months since your original interview here. I started the podcast right at the beginning of COVID. I interviewed you on April 1st, actually, and
April Fool's Day.
We're still kind of going through this whole piece. And so as a spiritual director, as a person who loves, lives, studies spiritual formation, what has this year taught you about solitude?
Solitude for me is akin to recollection, to the spiritual discipline of recollection, as being able to just kind of stop and allow my spirit, soul, mind, and body to kind of come together and be in a place where I can be open to whatever the Lord may have. But it goes beyond just stopping. For me, it goes beyond just stopping and saying, "Here I am, Lord," which is important. Because I needed to, before I could really begin to understand solitude for myself, I needed to understand what solitude of self was. To be present to self. Solitude to me is simply being present and being open to self. And I think sometimes people, self and then God and then others and then even all creation, to be open to that. And some people ask, why do I start with self? And I think if we don't understand self, if we don't allow ourselves to come together in such a way that we understand ourselves as God's image bearers, as God's children, as those who very easily this world will not take our spirit, soul, mind, and body and just knock us all out of balance. If we can't understand that it takes, by the grace of God, for that to be made right and to be present to ourselves and presence in the terms of awareness, of being of knowing how we might be coming across to other people, how we're being effective for the glory of God, and being open to that presence. So it begins for me with self, and then becoming aware of God. I don't think I can truly become aware of God's presence. And when I say God's presence, I'm not talking about God is there. God is. I'm talking about the terminology I use is it's an awakened spaciousness. It's an awareness, a very aware spaciousness, where we are living in such a way that we know ourselves truly in Christ Jesus, and we truly know ourselves, and God is everywhere. We become open to the reality of God's grace and God's love and God's perfection everywhere. And I think our world needs that kind of solitude desperately, because we're so focused on things other than, we're focused on elections, we're focused on COVID, we're focused on all the negative things, and all the upsetting things, that we allow the anxiety and the worry to come in such a way that we truly can't be present. We're so worried about what's happened in the past, sometimes guilt of the past. We're so concerned about what might happen in the future that we really can't do anything about, and that we forget how to be in the now. And that's what solitude to me is. It's being here and now, being present with self, God, others, and all creation. I think that I did a retreat years ago now. It was around Parker Palmer's Courage to Lead, and I went to Lake Weed up in Live Oak, Florida, up northern Florida, and one of the exercises that Parker Palmer had put in there, he wasn't there, but through his teaching, was to go out into nature. And it's a beautiful place, and And to this day, I've got this ugly, gnarly tree stuck in my head. I mean, it's almost like I have a relationship with the tree. Now, don't get me wrong, God's not in the tree, but there's something about the connection and being, I was so present that I can actually, I think I can know when I was present to something, when I can actually bring myself right back there. I can
Wow.
right now, I can feel myself sitting at the base of that tree and looking at it. It may not even be there anymore. It was that old, you know, it was just this old, gnarly, big oak. And, I even in my journals from the Courage to Lead, I have it written down. I have a drawing of it. I'm not an artist, and I have a drawing of it. And there was something that impacted me because, not because of the tree and not even because of the exercise, but because I was present, because Gene was there with God and nature. And I think it began by being in the presence of others. It was our little group. There was probably maybe 17 or 18 of us in this group, and we just kind of opened it, and then we came back and shared. And there was something about that process of going out, being present to self, being present to nature in that case, after having been present to others, that brings the presence of God to me in a powerful way. And I think it can't happen quickly. It has to happen over. It's a process, and I think as Westerners, we have a tendency to want everything yesterday, and we want to teach it, or we want to use it, or we want to, and do something with it. And the reality is that we forgot how to just be with it, be with self, be with God, be with nature, be with others in such a way that we don't impose ourselves. In a sense, we don't even leave an imprint. There's no imprint at all, because not to sound too contemplative, too out there, but in a sense, we're not there. It's just because we're part of everything. We become very connected, and we begin to realize, wow, this is so much bigger, so much more than just Gene and the tree and the others and even God. It's all kind of one. Maybe that's what Julian of Norwich meant when she said that she had a wanting with the Lord on the cross. So yeah, solitude. That's what it means for me to be present in such a way that we're present with the mystery, we're present with that which we cannot know, yet somehow we know it, not because we've figured it out or because we got some information about it, but because we've experienced it, because we lived it.
And it's such an inviting concept. And in 2020, people have gotten almost forced solitude, forced silence. And, instead of the abundance that you just described, we see suicides have been too prevalent. We've seen people turning to drugs and alcohol. There's been lots of depression. And so, even in the best cases, and I want to phrase this question a positive, but we know that solitude is easy. I mean, in prison, solitary confinement's meant to break a person, right? And so, given everyone's got a taste of this, and they may have not have thought about this as an opportunity for spiritual formation, what are the common struggles, even if a person intends to begin practicing solitude, silence, whether it's, time away to journal, to do lectio divina, to do centering prayer, the different things that we'll talk about as this conversation develops. But what are the common struggles that people are going to face that let them to actually be comfortable with themselves, let alone open to the possibility of real engagement with God's, isness and the world around them? So what as a spiritual director, what have you noticed that people struggle with, and how do you help them to get through those struggles?
I think there's two things that seem to be the biggest struggles, and the first one is a sense of guilt of wasting time.
Wow.
They feel like they're just wasting their time. That being by themselves is meaningless. It has no purpose. And the other thing, which really is strange, but I've seen it in all, it's pervasive, is that the sense of not only is it a waste of time, but I don't have any time for it. Which sounds weird. But this is so I need to be doing something else. I need to be, I've got this, that, and you can almost sense that we make things up to do so that we can make ourselves feel good, or we can feel, especially those in ministry and those who are in counseling and those who are in helping professions. We have a tendency to, if we're not actually doing something, one of our practices or something we've learned, then we feel like we have this guilt of wasting time, and that's dangerous, because that can lead to a sense of feeling of meaninglessness, hopelessness, without having purpose. But the truth of true solitude, and there's the Russians have a word for solitude, and I can't pronounce it, but the Russian word for solitude means being with everyone. And it's akin to silence, and silence is the other side too. That's most people are, they practice silence, and invariably, and this is what happens, and you can expect it if you decide to practice silence, the silence that comes with centering prayer, or Lectio Divina, or prayer quiet, or even the prayer examen as you run through that. Things come up that the shadow side of us comes up, and the parts of us that we don't like, or thoughts, things of jealousy, or even hatred of things that from years ago that we thought we took care of, that are long gone. They come up, and if we look at that as a negative, if we allow that to make us feel depressed, if it helps us feel like we're worthless, then it's very dangerous. But if we allow it to have a sense, like Thomas Keating said, if we allow ourselves in centering prayer to allow it to be divine therapy, say, give it, we can be in that place, and again, be with God. When I talk about being with God, especially when I do Lectio Divinity at the end, it's always it's allowing yourself to be in the midst of the one who truly is, the great I am, and you just used the word isness. Is to be able to allow us to be in that place where, again, God is everywhere, and we sense God's love coming over us, the filling. It's a palpable feeling in such a way that we can know that it's okay, that we don't have to worry and be anxious. Worry and anxiety are a huge problem right now. I'm not talking about being prepared or being concerned about something. That's we need to do that. But when we allow ourselves to be debilitated by anxiety and worry, and we open ourselves up to a sense of hopelessness, or see, solitude is not. We think solitude is aloneness. It's not alone. We're not alone at all. As a matter of fact, the closer we get to God, think about it. The closer we get to God, the closer we get to everyone else, because God is closer to everyone else than we could ever be. And so you've seen the pyramid, right? Where I've done this in marriage counseling over the years. As a pastor, I'll take a triangle, and I'll put the husband's name and the wife's name there, and put God here, and I say, following this pyramid, how do you get closer to one another? You don't go this way, you go this way, and you become closer to one another in God. So if we can allow ourselves not to be alone, in a sense of hopelessness, or a sense of nihilism, but being in a place where we can truly allow ourselves to be alone with God, and as such connected to everyone. I've had moments, I bet you have as well, in centering prayer, where the connection with the world felt amazing. It felt like you were not sitting in your room alone. You were in the presence of God in such a way that you allowed yourself to be with God, and just by definition, be with everyone. And be open to that. So solitude is not aloneness. Solitude is actually being with God and all creation, and not just creation that we see on this earth. That's why it is important to be able to be present with creation, with also, but creation of heaven and earth. God created heavens and the earth, so it's almost a sense of feeling the eternity of God, the eternity of the heavens, if you will, penetrating the temporal, and recognizing the connection to all things, and being there, again, being, and not, you can't do it. Yeah, you can't. I wish I could write a book that says this is how you do it. I can't, but I can help people experience it, and that goes back to your question. As a spiritual director, I can help people to stop and And it always takes a process. It always takes a process. It always takes going home for the directee to go home and practice and then come back and talk about it, because invariably they initially try to do it as an exercise, or they try to do it as a if in seminary, if you're required to do it, it becomes a requirement. And I've had in journals that I've seen from seminary students for centering prayer, I've seen many of them say, when I first started this, it was an experience, and to tell you the truth, I'm excited to start doing it apart from the requirement, apart from having just to live into it, because they feel the presence of God. And that's the point. As a good spiritual director, that's really all we're interested in doing. We're not interested in teaching them anything. We let God do that, and we know that God can do much better than we can if we can just. But we can't do it. We can't help someone else do it unless we've at least become semi-proficient at it. We have to say that, we can't say, well, I decided to start doing centering prayer last week, and so now I'm going to teach it because I know the steps, or the prayer of examen, or any of the contemplative practices.
Okay. Yeah, and just to take that one step further, I know, we both work with a lot of pastors, and this has been an exceedingly difficult time for pastors, not to single them out because other people have had a hard time too, but pastors, spiritual leaders, churches have had to be shut down. Pastors have had to become IT specialists, learn how to go on video. They've lost at some level the old means to doing the end work of being a pastoral presence. What have you learned through your work as a spiritual director by working with pastors during this time? What have been some insights? Where do you see people having the biggest struggles? Again, a lot of pastors are listening right now, and they may find, they may be affirmed in some of their struggles. And there's also a lot of folks that have pastors that may want to reach out and support their pastor in some different ways. So what have you learned about the struggles of ministry during a pandemic?
One of the things that I've asked several pastors is who are struggling with just that, struggling with how do I be an IT person? How do I do church in a whole new way and all that? I asked them to go back and reconnect with what made them want to become a pastor to start with. What was it? How did God move in you? And know that this is an opportunity to do just that. I've got, I guess maybe, I don't know, maybe the Lord just does it, but a lot of the pastors, or even just my directees that have the tendency to come to me, are natural contemplatives, or at least have a contemplative sense. And when I gave them permission to sit, per se, to be a contemplative in the midst of your congregation, and I've got reports that have come back and says, I was preaching a sermon, and I prepared it in a little different way. I tried to be with the word. I did a lectio through it first, and then in the middle, I just felt the Lord say, "Be quiet." And I sat with a minute, 2 minutes, 3 minutes of silence in the midst of the congregation and said, "Just listen. Can you hear God?" And the ones that have said that to me said, if I didn't allow myself, because that's what their natural inclination was, if I didn't allow myself to do that, I wouldn't have allowed myself to do that years ago or whatever, because I feel like they think I was either crazy, or again, I wasn't doing my job. I felt guilty because I wasn't preaching and talking and doing all this. So I think that giving a pastor, or giving really any Christian, two things: the kind of permission to be who they really are, be who God called them to be, and then having the courage to actually do it, to actually be, and doing it is not to be it in the midst of their congregation. And I have one friend of mine now. He's been directly now for a while, and he says that he does it during his administrative board meetings. He does it. It just, and it isn't something that he plans to do ever. It's just something that now that he said, yes, I can be a contemplative. It's okay for me to sit in silence for a period of time. It's okay for me to just to soak in God's word and not necessarily study it even. And all of a sudden it became very natural for him to say, in the midst of an ad board meeting or a trustees meeting or something like that, to just say, let's stop and let's just listen. Let's be open. And at first, they thought he was strange, but they all of a sudden the people started sharing. They started saying things. They started sensing, because after he was done with the silence, he'd say, "What did you hear?" what did God say to you? And it was almost refreshing to know that they didn't have to come in and, and do all the trustees to get the plumbing squared away, or the finance to get the balance, to get the books balanced. That's all gets done. But to just realize that what's really important, to know that that's where our purpose and meaning lies, in the midst of just stopping and giving themselves the opportunity just to listen, to be open. And that's what silence is all about. That's what the contemplative context of silence is, really being able to listen. I mean, Elijah on the mountain, right? He didn't hear God in the firestorm, didn't hear God in the wind, didn't hear God in the earthquake. But when he went back, and even though Scripture doesn't say it, I have a sense that after each of those events, that Elijah went back into into the cave, the one we know he went into at the end. And I think that he went back and he sat with God. Then he went out, and then God wasn't. It didn't seem like God was there. Comes back, and each time, and then finally, when he was sitting there, it says he put his mantle on, and he went out, and in sheer silence he heard God. And but he needed to go through that process of, again, we're kind of looking into it a little more, but people, we look for God in the big firestorms, we look for God in the earthquakes, we look for God in the all the thunder and lightning and and in big ways, when God is. And I don't want to sound trite, but the reality is, when we walk out the door, God will draw our attention to. I have a garden in our backyard. I live almost like a monk. I mean, I have my long morning devotionals, and I have my time in the morning on Facebook Live, and then I go have my breakfast in my backyard, and then I walk my garden, and I look around. And I tell you, if you told me 5 years ago that I would be coming to my wife, this happened Sunday morning. My wife has been, because I've been busy with a lot of different things, she's been doing our Sunday morning message. And just 2 minutes before the message started, she was just walking out the back door of the house, and she goes and stands in the garden. We have, set up area. And I saw a hummingbird, and I went running into the house and said, Mare, hurry up, there's a hummingbird. And it's only because I happened to sit, and I can promise you that 5 years ago or so, if it was 2 minutes before either I was going to preach or somebody else was going to preach, I would not have been aware of that hummingbird.
Good.
But I was there, and you would have laughed. You would have. I was so excited about it. I knew we have a vine that's growing up around the cross we have in the backyard that is a bleeding heart. It's going to probably have flowers for the first time this Sunday, and somehow that just excites me. It's just like, and it's not that I'm not a pantheist. I don't believe that God is in those things. I don't think God is that, but I think that the glory of God can be seen in so many more places, and that's the positive, if it makes any sense, the positive of COVID, that it gets us to stop and slow down. But in our minds, we don't want to. In our minds, we're guilty. We feel like we need to be doing. We feel like we're not being who God wants us to, or God or our congregation wants us to be, or whatever. And the reality is, it opens our hearts and our minds to a spacious awareness that sets us free. It's to be open to, oh wow, God really is everywhere. Wow, look at the hummingbird. Look at the flowers. Look at listen to the kids. My grandchildren just came in. I can hear them in the background. And it's like, wow, why not be aware of that instead of, I promise you that if we were doing this interview or our little podcast, if we were doing this back 5 or 6 years ago, and I know you sent me a little list of questions to look at, I'd be freaking out. Like, oh man, how am I going to answer these questions? But the reality is that, you know what? I'm just gonna let myself be, and hopefully let some of the experience, some of the way of being that I've discovered, just kind of be translated into whatever we're saying.
Yeah, that's really powerful, and that's a great lesson for pastors. And you said the one thing, a lot of pastors feel guilty right now or feel shame about their workload, and you actually answered you gave a powerful antidote to that, which raises another issue with the COVID. Again, I know that you've used Zoom, you use Facebook Live for your own ministry, but there's been struggles in the church over. We don't have to get into the online communion, whether it's good or bad, whole thing. But I mean, the whole issue has been presence, physical presence. And so In terms of spiritual formation and spiritual direction, how important is actual presence, and in what ways are, like, like we're talking on Zoom today, what ways are virtual meetings helpful, and maybe how are they unhelpful in terms of spirituality? Have you done any thinking on that this year?
I have, and actually, it's come out of our experience with the Awakening Institute. Is that our classes, as you know, are almost set up like for little mini retreats. We have so there's and it's really hard for that to translate on Zoom. It's it's you have these squares up there, but it's not. You don't see the person next to you. You don't kind of. You really can't catch up. So I think that presence is really important. And I hope we get back to that. And I'm sure we will, but I hope we get back to that sooner than later. At the same time, I saw a study all the way back at Easter time, and they said that more people heard the gospel over the internet than ever in the history of humanity.
Wow.
People that never went to church, to people that maybe were with someone that did go to church, that now they're watching someone, or they're watching a podcast, or they're watching a message, or they're watching their own church. So almost every church now has this, and they watched, and they actually heard. And so the message that's the benefit of having this huge internet presence, is that we can be open to it. Now, all that being said, is that I have felt the presence of the people who were listening to me via Facebook, me sitting here, and then some out in Minneapolis, some of them out in California, some of them in New Jersey, some of them in Southern Florida. They're all coming from all over the place. I felt a connection, and all I do is mention it once or twice. Can you feel one another's presence? And then we decided to start opening with as the names come up on the screen, asking everyone to pray for one another. And the interaction that I'm seeing outside the actual Facebook Live is amazing. We're seeing people that have made friends. A guy who's been, I think he's been to every single one of our morning out in California, has really become like a spiritual friend for a woman here in Cocoa. So they're 3,000 miles apart, and she comments on a lot of his stuff, and he puts up little scriptures and things like that. And I've seen it where people have said, "I feel God's presence." And so all of a sudden we start radically understanding that the distance doesn't make any difference. So, but we have to overcome that. I've been thinking a lot about liminal space.
Yeah.
We've all, liminal space in a nutshell is simply we come from one place, we enter into a time usually of turmoil, chaos, something going on, and then we come out the other side different. And most of us don't like that. Most of us kind of like the way we were, and let's hold on to the old way, and let's do that. And then when we enter into this chaotic time, that's when anxiety and worry and all comes in. But what would it look like for us to embrace this liminality? The liminal space simply means threshold space. It's a space between when one thing changes, one door closes, and then the other door is opening. But we're not quite there anywhere yet. We're still in that place. So how do we live into that liminal space and embrace the pain and the struggle of change, and being open to whatever might be there for us on the other end, knowing that something is going to be on the other end. I think we all know that when this is all over, when COVID is all over, that when we come out, we're not going to be the way we were. Things are not going to go back. There's no such thing as going back to so-called normal. It's going to be new. It's going to be something different, and that's good. That's good. That's where growth happens. But if we never embraced the liminality, if we never embrace this liminal time, and we've had basically 2020 has been a year of a liminal space, and so how can we embrace this instead of trying to avoid it, trying to deny it, trying to get angry about it, trying to do the different things that we do, lashing out, the anger that's out there, all the different things. Instead of doing that, what would it look like to embrace it? I mean, we don't say thank you for COVID, but we do say, okay, Lord, I know that you can do something amazing in the midst of this, and we're here, so why not live it? Why not embrace it? Why not hold on to it and even consider it as in some ways holy or sacred, in such a way that we can and knowing that we're going to come out on the other end different, but different in a better way. It's going to be, and and I know I've said this to a lot of people, and invariably people ask, well, what will it look like? I don't know. I don't know, but that's the point. The point is, we don't need to know. The point is, embrace it, live it, be present with God, enter into that. I think simplicity is a huge part of who we need to be. We become, and I'm not talking about just having little. I mean, you can have a lot and still live simplicity, but to be open to the reality that, you know what, I'm too attached to this. I'm too dependent on this. My identity is too connected to this, whatever it might be. And I'm going to just let that go. I'm going to have the courage to let it go. And I'm going to just allow myself just to enter into a place where I'm no longer attached. I'm detached, and just trust and be open to whatever. And that makes silence possible, because once we've done, we can't, if we're doing, and we're trying to complicate our lives, we have no time to be silent and listen. It certainly makes solitude nearly impossible, because you can't be present in the midst of that. And and silence, you can't listen. You can't be open to whatever might happen. What an opportunity we have, and we have had. But I don't know if you want to call it, it's the enemy's attack to say, no, you're useless. What's wrong with you? You're not getting anything done. I mean, Brian, you wrote a book, right? You have one coming out. You have another one you're writing. Maybe you would have done that during during regular times, but maybe not. Maybe this book that you wrote, I know you have a Centering Prayer book coming out. It's like, maybe this book will be, it's more of you. It's more of your experience of God rather than just your intellect, which, is great, but it's more than that. And and I think that we have the opportunity to do that. And what's more gratifying than if someone reads your book all the way through and says, it changed my life, or it helped me more. That's amazing. And then now we'll talk about purpose and meaning. And you can take advantage of that. And you don't have to write a book. You can do other things. You could sit and you could silently pray for your congregation, for your people, just quietly in the midst. I mean, every pastor says, yes, I pray for my congregation, but do we really? But here's the opportunity to embrace the so-called worthless time, the waste of time. Embrace it. I think I forget who wrote it, but one of the book there, I think it's titled Sabbath, the book, and the definition of Sabbath was wasting time with God. And that's what liminal space is. It's like saying, this is not about me accomplishing anything. This is about me becoming something and allowing that to flow into my life, and then not only into my life, but flow through me and into the lives of people around us. Bob Tuttle used to say all the time that we all have a sphere of influence, right? We all have a few people that we can influence. Why not take advantage of that? Whatever it is, whoever that might be.
Those are some deep lessons from 2020 that you shared. I really like what you said about liminality. Now, this will come out in December of the year, but I mean, you could do this whenever you're listening, but I think one of the things that's interesting is to think ahead, right? Not just to 2021, but even beyond there, and think about from a spiritual formation perspective, putting together like a rhythm of life, a rule of life, things that you've learned. We talked about this, at least the categories in our first conversation back in episode 1, what you call the 5 S's: simplicity, silence, stillness, solitude, spaciousness. And we've touched on some of those a little bit again today. How would you help a person who says, wow, this has been a really difficult year, but I recognize that I need more of God. I need to create practices. So in a sense, I'm chopping firewood so that the next time we get a scary time that and beyond, I can actually flourish in some way and use it in some of the ways that you even talked about for yourself, how you've embraced the liminality. So how do you help a person that would come to you for spiritual direction set up some kind of healthy rhythm that fuels them for lifelong growth in God's grace and love? How would you answer that, Gene?
We have, everybody's different. Yeah. So it's really hard to just kind of take a cookie cutter and put it over the top. I use the Enneagram to help people kind of discover some things about themselves and let them decide whether what they're hearing fits them or not. It seems like, of course, the Enneagram is broken up in body, body, heart, and head, or some people say gut, heart, and body. And those different personalities, those different ways of being, usually we can fall into one of those three easy enough. We can identify them pretty well. And this is where I start. Is that if someone, say, is in the heart area, which is 2, 3, and 4, then usually silence, usually entering into a practice like centering prayer, something like that, where it's usually a good place to begin. Now, and we don't have time to go into it today, but there are triads. There are growth triads that that the heart connects with the head and connects with the gut or the body to bring us to a whole place. But we can begin there, and so. If we discover that someone comes from that 2, 3, or 4, then usually we'll try to practice a silence. If they're coming from a body, an 8, 9 or 1 place, then something like a contemplative walk, or something that engages the body. Christian yoga, some of the different things are wonderful. So we'll start there. If it's more of a head thing, then Lectio Divina seems to work well with head people that kind of like to think and kind of bring themselves out of just kind of learning about the scripture and then bring themselves into a contemplative place. So that's the first thing, discovering what practice connects, and then we ask and unpack. I don't like the rule of life teachings that kind of say, okay, pick a time in the morning and get up at 6 o'clock in the morning, whatever, and then do this, and then a half hour later do this, and kind of put that in and just do that. I like people to discover what works for them, and this is where the struggle comes in. Yeah. The hardest part is you can't just say, okay, I'm going to practice centering prayer for a week, or I'm going to put centering prayer in my rule of life, and I'm going to put in there some Bible study, I'm going to put in there some worship, I'm going to do some different things, and just kind of say, okay, there it is. You have to experience it. I know people that usually they're body types, they need to worship. They're the people that throw their hands in the air, and the people and so we start there, and we say, how can we support that need, the body need, and then how can we connect the head and the heart with the body? It's a process, but the reason, and like I said, I can't go into a lot of detail today, but the point is that it takes time. We have to stop thinking that we can just kind of write up a rule of life. And I've seen people do rule of life with charts and graphs, with mandalas. I've seen them do all kinds of different ways, and that's wonderful. But if you haven't lived the practice that you're considering, if you haven't truly allowed that practice to become part of who you are, then it's almost self-defeating, because you get discouraged and you change. And that's why so many of us will bounce from one thing to the other. I see that with students, and they're practicing when we're teaching centering prayer, is that you can't imagine the percentage that say, oh man, why do we have to do this? This doesn't, what does this have to do with my counseling program? What does this have to do with, or I don't have time for this. I'm in seminary. I have a family. I have a job. This is ridiculous. I mean, to that point sometimes, and then some stay there, but most will all of a sudden at some point realize, oh, okay, yeah, now I see what this is doing with me. I see how it's changing my life that I didn't even realize. And then near the end, it's the most gratifying thing for me to hear is that, oh, I'm so glad that I no longer have to do it as an exercise. I can now just live into it and let it be part of my rule of life, part of who I am. But it does take, with students, for example, it's usually 13 weeks or so of them actually practicing it. And so you need to be able to say, you need to have the courage, you need to have the perseverance, and you have to have the right heart to be able to say, you know what, I'm gonna do this, even if at first I don't get it. And the truth is that, most of the time we don't get it. Sometimes I know people that practice centering prayer for a long time that didn't get it for 3 years, and all of a sudden, wow, it's they see where they've come from and where they've gone. Journaling is a great way. I mean, to be able to, I look back at my journals from 20 years ago, and I say, man, I guess I did grow a little bit. I was really a nitwit back then. It's like, so you get to see that and you get to live that. But if I didn't journal for, well, you don't have to do it 20 years, but in my case, if I didn't journal for that time, I never would have the opportunity to go back and see that growth, or to be able to see some of the things that the Lord told me that I forgot. And it's the same thing with all the contemplative practice. To build a rule of life, you have to discover who you are, build on that, and then make a commitment. You have to make a true commitment, and it takes courage, it takes spiritual courage to go ahead and do that. So,
yeah, I love that teaching on courage. It's so important, because most people misunderstand courage, and in a sense, you make that commitment first to something, and you have this sense like, geez, I want more of God. I want to try this, and then what courage doesn't. But I always, when I coach folks, the thing is, we all admire courage, but the fact of the matter is, if you have to have courage, in part of my language here, but it sucks, because courage doesn't feel good. It only feels good after the fact. And you look back, wow, I was courage, and look where I got to. But I think that's such a great word for spiritual practices. It's not like these are onerous things, but when you try something new, you're not going to get that instantaneous result. And so you have to have the courage to essentially to show up. Like I talk about with scripture, have the courage to read, have the courage to sit in silence. And then, like you said, to be consistent. And then lo and behold, it's not an automatic thing. This isn't transactional, but you sit with courage. And the good news is, it's like Bob Tuttle does say, pay attention, show up. God has more invested in this than you do, right? And so, so that was a great word. Let me just ask you one final question. You've been really generous with your time today. I asked first time you're here, you gave your key books that you recommended for people to read, and you talked about Thomas Merton. You talked about David Steindl-Rass's Gratefulness in the Heart of Prayer. The Merton book was New Seeds of Contemplation. And then you mentioned Benedicta Ward, The Desert Fathers, Sayings of the Early Christian Monks. So those are like if you had to eliminate your whole library, what would it be? And so like this time I asked you a question, like, what books have you read this past year that you found really helpful, just to kind of narrow it down and see? So how would you answer that question? What have you found really helpful this year?
Here's my little, I'm like everyone else. I have lots of books here, but these are the ones that really made a difference for me. This is an author most of us probably never heard of, Dom Augustin Guillerand, which is The Prayer of the Presence of God. This book opened my understanding of what it meant to truly rely on prayer, and to truly some of the things I talked about earlier on presence. It teaches us to guard our hearts, to be in that, and he doesn't use the language, but he really alludes to it, is to be in that liminal place, to be in that place. This is another Thomas Merton book that I think I mentioned just earlier, that I have my garden, and I've kind of become more open to this, to the creation around me over the last several years. And this book I read, usually bark on the back here. I read this, just finished this back in November this year, and it's Thomas Merton, When the Trees Say Nothing. It's really a poetic, but he talks about it's the same thing. It's when not needing to own, not needing to exploit, not needing not needing anything, just being, and not trying to get anything out of it. And that's what he talks about when the trees say, that's the point of trees say nothing, although he unpacks some really good stuff in there. This is one that's a little more on the esoteric side, but The Future of Wisdom by Bruno Barnhart. It's really, he talks about the rebirth of sapiential Christianity, of wisdom Christianity. And I liked it. I mean, there's some stuff in here I didn't necessarily agree with 100% theologically, but when I liked the concept that he brought out, that we truly can and need to move from an intellectual based to a wisdom based. And I don't know if he wrote it in here, but I began to think of wisdom truly as information, knowledge, right thinking, orthodoxy, and compassion. And having a place, and I started thinking about if we can, if we can have a right thinking, but have a compassion for those, being willing to enter into the pain of others that don't have the same kind of thinking, that might be a little different, we really could change the world. And Barnhart passed away a few years ago, but and as a matter of fact, I think he was Cynthia Bergeau's spiritual director.
Okay.
He's really awesome. This is the newest book on mysticism, not the newest, but mysticism and contemporary life, essays in honor of Bernard McGinn. This has some great essays in it that just kind of really were. I liked it because it brought everything from like Ronald Rollheiser, and he can kind of get a little edgy out there, but I like a lot of what he writes. And then he starts talking about experiencing the risen Christ. That's chapter 2 by Sandra M. Schneiders. Someone that I'm looking for more of her stuff. She's written some other things. I think she's a professor. She's a professor somewhere. This, what was it here? There was another one here. Yeah, Prayers and the Teachings of Julian of Norwich is in here. That's just 3 of the articles, but they're just essays, and it's a great book to kind of, if you're looking to go deeper in the mystical understanding. If you want your head to spin a little bit, then Meister Eckhart. I read this year. It's the complete mystical works of Meister Eckhart. It's basically all his sermons. And the very last thing, and I pulled a lot out of this, but the very last thing he writes is on detachment, and it's a simple little essay, and he really nails some of the, again, in a wisdom way and a mystical way. And then this one is one I read just recently. Actually, maybe it was a little while ago, but Liminal Space. This is Richard Rohr's Wanting that comes out twice a year, and again, there's this is actually as the art of spiritual companionship. He talks about that. They talk about the Enneagram. They talk about the wisdom of Jesus. They talk about a lot of different things, but most important, they talk about transition, and that's why I think this is an important book, or at least it was helpful for me. I don't know if I'd label it important necessarily, but something was very helpful during our time, during this transitional time that we're all going through. If for no other reason, it helps us become aware that we are going through a transition. We're not trying to go back to the old way, because you can't. And
right.
And we're transitioning into something very new, and it can either be exciting or it could be debilitating. And that was helpful. A little book. I think it's volume 8, number 1. That must be the beginning of the year when that came out. But those are my little books that I pulled off my shelf that looked like they were helpful for me this year.
Well, fantastic. And thanks so much for today. Tell us how we can get in touch with you. You put out a weekly newsletter or blog post. You have workshops. You're open to take persons who might be looking for a spiritual director. So what are the best ways for folks to learn more about you or to get in touch with you, Gene?
Email. It's theawakeninginstitute@gmail.com. It's just like it says, all lowercase, all connected, theawakeninginstitute@gmail.com. And the website, www.theawakeninginstitute.com. And you can see a lot of different things. And we'd love to hear from anyone. There you'll have my contact information. I think my personal cell phone is even on the website. So you can look that up, and you can, but yeah, if you're looking for spiritual direction, or if you're, even if it's just one, or sometimes people just want to talk once or twice, that's fine. And I'll be happy to do that. And then our classes that we're kind of reforming now from our retreat format, which was the in-person format, we're moving to more of a Zoom format, and we'll stay there as long as we can, although I'm hoping we'll be able to move back to our old way, or not to the old way, but the new old way.
Yeah, and I know I've found it, just as a plug, I've personally found Gene's workshops to be really helpful. He was my official teacher in centering prayer. I took his workshop, found it really helpful. Took a workshop on Lectio Divina, and took a workshop, I think, on Christian mysticism. Actually, maybe another one even. So these were really helpful things. And so if you're interested in spiritual practices, Gene Yotka is a guy that's devoted his life to learning. And one of the things I love about Gene is his just love for knowledge and his willingness to share. Thank you, Gene, for all that you do. You're ministry to the body of Christ, for being faithful, and for being a good friend of Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations and me personally. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Brian. It goes both ways. You're a blessing to a lot of people.
Well, thank you.
Yeah.
Well, folks, until next time, thank you for listening. Live by faith, be known by love, and be voices of hope in a world that desperately needs it. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much for listening to this week's episode of the Deep Dive Spirituality Conversations podcast. It's a real privilege to have you as a listener. And if you found this episode to be helpful, would you consider sharing it with a friend and also leaving a review that would help other people to find it? If you're interested in the materials that my guest talked about, I do have links that take you to Amazon. They're affiliate links. They help if you purchase things. It doesn't affect your price, but it does help to support the podcast. And also, if you're interested in group coaching specifically designed for the needs and growth of pastors and spiritual leaders, I'd invite you to take a look at www.deepdivespirituality.com. If I can serve you in any way, reach out to me. You can send an email at deepdivespirituality@gmail.com. Again, thank you for listening, and we'll see you next week.